Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and knock this out. Alright, first question. I know heavy strength training is best, but I've noticed that new clients tend to have a completely flat RPE scale. They can do 40 a lot of times, but can't do 50 even once. It is almost like they have a wall when it comes to pain tolerance or discomfort. Actually, it's a neuromuscular efficiency issue. Humans are naturally an endurance species. We're not actually strong naturally. So what ends up happening is, as you know, as someone who probably trains people, and I try to tell people lifting heavy weight is a skill. You can build a ton of muscle, but you still have to learn the skill to hit a heavy 1 rep max. In other words, there's a peaking component even for powerlifting purposes, right? I'll tell guys, I mean, you can do volume to build muscle that will make you stronger, but to actually utilize that movement pattern with a heavy weight does take some practice. So what ends up happening there, even though they might be able to do, 40 pounds or 40 kilos or whatever you're talking about on an exercise for 10 reps, or 8 reps or whatever, you look at the jump and say, well, that's only a 25% increase. They should be able to do several reps with 50, right? They can do 10 with 40. They should be able to do probably at least 2 or 3 minimum with the 50, and they get pinned under it, right? They can't move it. It's lack of the motor unit learning for lifting a heavy weight, and that's heavy for them. When you start exceeding weights that are heavier than about 75% of a theoretical 1 rep max, for completely untrained novice lifters, they just do not have the movement pattern skills on that movement to lift the heavy weight. They can't handle it. So until people have been trained oftentimes to hit a truly heavy weight for them, and that's relative, the only time they can do it is in an emergency situation when their adrenaline is up. They can't just voluntarily produce nearly maximum force. It's an interesting thing with humans, and that's what's going on. And once you train them a little bit, all of a sudden that wall goes away. All right, next question. It would mean a lot. That's 2 words, by the way. Separate those with the space. If you could answer this, I'm going to try to sound non-trolly and as serious as possible in this one for once. Would bulking 2 months on and using 1 month for cutting be optimal? I really don't want to bulk over 16% body fat. Is it really necessary to bulk to 20% body fat to maximize strength? Not only would I have to buy new clothes, but my friends and family would call me fat. Again, I'm not even joking or trolling when I say that. It's something I'd have to deal with because I've been close to that body fat before. Thanks. Hope you can answer this for me. All right, brother. You don't have to bulk to 20% body fat. If you're fairly lean, if you're a lean guy, I'm talking 12% or lower, and you want to bulk up to about 16% over 2 months and then spend a month cutting back down in phases like that to maintain a certain body composition, I think that's totally reasonable. That's totally reasonable. If you've got practical reasons for doing it, again, clothing, appearance, things like that, that's totally fine. The only thing you need to keep in mind is that to gain appreciable amounts of muscle mass, you're going to have to gain a little bit of fat. So if, say, you go from 12%ish up to 16%, and then you cut back down to 12% each time, and you're fluctuating about 4 to 5% on the body fat during your bulking, I think that's totally reasonable. I think you can make good gains doing that. You can stay at a body fat you're probably comfortable with. Are you going to maximize gains? You're probably not going to hit your absolute maximum gains, but you're going to make pretty solid gains doing that. So I think that's fair, and I think that's reasonable. And I don't even think that's the trollish question. Again, it comes down to different people's goals, and it has to do with ages. Like I would say guys in their 20s and stuff, it's not that big of a deal, but when you get to be my age and stuff, I'm trying to get down lower and not even go over 15% body fat again. I'm older, I got to think about my heart health and stuff. So I get it, brother. I get it. So yeah, go ahead. I think that'll be fine. All right, next question. Hey Jason, what are your thoughts on red light therapy for muscle/strength gains? Apparently there is some evidence that shining red light on your balls increases testosterone by 300%. Scott Herman did a video on it a while back. I think this sounds like complete nonsense. Complete nonsense. We've discussed this ad nauseum before. Testosterone boosters don't work. There's no legitimate evidence out there to suggest that any sort of testosterone booster really works other than certain pharmaceutical substances. And even a lot of those can be unreliable. they're more expensive than testosterone as a general rule. The actual substances that a doctor might give you to help with things like testosterone production oftentimes have more side effects and cost more money than the doctor just giving you testosterone does. And so that's a whole different topic. Then we know that over-the-counter test boosters don't work. So something like this red light nonsense sounds like complete BS. I mean, furthermore, no matter what you think a boost is going to be, if a boost from your normal production stays inside the normal range, that usually doesn't even cause more muscle growth. Like, people need to remember that also. A lot of people have this weird idea that they think that people who have higher than average testosterone levels versus someone who's slightly below average, just a hair below average on their production, that they somehow gain muscle faster. That's not actually necessarily true either. I mean, there are medical doctors out there. I've heard the barbell medicine guys talk about that actually testosterone levels inside the normal range aren't even always indicative of muscle gains. In other words, guys who produce sometimes a little more test than others don't necessarily gain more muscle from lifting weights. It's not even always the case. So, you know, people get into nonsense like this and you're going to start shining red light on your testicles and stuff. I mean, people who believe in nonsense like this, you're right for the taking. Like, you're the ones who you are in danger of getting ripped off and conned and possibly hurting yourself when you start falling for silly stuff like this. I've never even heard of this, but just looking at the numbers even being discussed there and looking at the way the body works, it sounds so absurd that I wouldn't even bother to believe it. I would question the legitimacy of the data and think it was a joke if anyone even tried to do a study on this. Absolutely ludicrous. And furthermore, even boosting your testosterone levels slightly from whatever you do in terms of being in the normal range has never, ever, ever been associated with gaining more muscle mass in the research. That's just the reality of it. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I'm wondering if the bench is really necessary if one already does high volume overhead pressing. Thoughts? Man, it's just complicated. You're going to put on more muscle if you bench also. You're going to put on more muscle, and it has to do with more chest involvement, things like that. Yeah, you're going to get more shoulder and everything from doing the standing press. Yes, it's going to add muscle in other places, but you're not going to maximize chest development. Remember when I went over a year without doing any chest work, right? I was doing nothing but overhead pressing, and then when I started benching again, my chest started growing. Like, people noticed the difference in my shirt within a month, just from old muscle memory. So it really depends on what you care about. Like, if you're trying to really build a big chest, you're going to need to do bench or dips or something like that. You're going to need to do it. You can't just overhead press. From an athletic functional perspective, I think the overhead press is better. And if you were to ask me, for example, if I didn't care about chest development because I have to be a YouTuber, and if my chest shrank down to nothing, it would actually hurt my income in the long term, as I'm actually working on some of these things in proportions a little bit and looking a little better as I'm cutting. And I didn't ever plan on ever doing another powerlifting meet for the rest of my life, I wouldn't train my chest at all. I just do overhead pressing. I don't really care that much. But again, people want to see it from an aesthetic perspective. Certain sports, you need it. And if I ever want to powerlift again, I need to have a strong bench. I mean, if it wasn't for those things, I think overhead press would be fine. But you need to keep in mind, you're not necessarily going to be as proportionate as you might want to be. Your upper chest and stuff might be okay, but your overall chest development is going to lag if you're not doing dips or benching or something in addition to all that overhead pressing. But you'll be strong. No, don't get me wrong. You'll be strong. You'll be functional from doing it. I'm a big fan of the press. But you may not get the development that you want. And it really depends on your goals. It's what it comes down to. What are your goals? What are you trying to do? All right, next question. Hey Jason, is the pull/chin-up an accessory to the overhead press in the same way that the pendlay row is an accessory to the bench press? Interesting. No, actually the pull-up is just as good of a bench accessory as the pendlay is, to be honest. It really is. So I know because you're thinking of vertical push versus vertical pull, horizontal push versus horizontal pull. I do see kind of what you're saying, and there is a certain element to that. But I think it could be a bit overstated here. Like, let's be realistic here. The bench press is a better accessory to the overhead press than your back work is. Well, let's be honest. Now, the interesting point, which muscles get worked and you're pressing slightly more on the overhead press than they do on the bench. The long head of the tricep and the upper chest, right? Do pull-ups and chin-ups when done through a full range of motion also incorporate those muscles? Yeah. In addition to working the antagonist muscles, the biceps, the brachialis, rear delts, lats, all of that. Yeah. So would I say, hey, this is absolutely an accessory to them, a better accessory? Not necessarily, not necessarily. But when you start looking a little bit at those secondary muscles, maybe it might help a little bit. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I certainly think pull-ups done in conjunction with your overhead press will certainly balance a lot of those muscles out. And I think it will give you a lot better stabilizing. It'll give you a better platform to press from, lower injury rates, everything else. So I think they're a good idea to incorporate. But I think for the most part, you could get a lot of that from the pendlay row also. So it's a matter of what you want to do. But I mean, I don't think you're on the wrong track. I don't think you're on the wrong track there. In other words, doing a lot of pull-ups, if you're going to do tons of overhead pressing, is probably a good idea. And I would personally advocate that. I would advocate that and say go for it. It's a good idea in general. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 3.